When you have wind and solar, it's a stop-gap arrangement. Wind and solar can fail anytime. The United Kingdom, the UK faced a lot of challenges because their offshore windmills stopped working and they had to instantaneously turn on their coal plants. Raptors are birds like eagle. Thousands of raptors are killed by wind turbines. They're calling wind as clean and environmentally friendly is a joke. And besides that, if the viewers are not aware, the wind turbine requires a lot of fossil fuel. We also have the example of California and Germany, which boast that they are the world leaders in renewables. But the problem is data has shown that due to their excessive dependency on wind and solar, price of electricity has gone up and it has been passed on to the consumers. The most recent event is the Glasgow Climate Conference, and they use diesel generators to power these EV cars at a climate conference event. Hello, my name is Vijay. I am an environmentalist. I graduated with an environmental degree from the University of East Anglia in England. Following that, I've been a researcher and a climate researcher with numerous organizations across 3 continents. And I'm passionate about the problems that the world is facing with the environment. And my goal is to help the world navigate better in future. Climate has always been changing. Now, this is not to say that there is no climate change right now. It has always been changing, and we know this from the various paleoclimatology records in tree rings and through ice cores. We are aware that the atmosphere and the temperature on land went through a lot of changes over thousands of years. And the current phase that we are in is called the Holocene, and it's a 10,000 year period, 10,000 to 15,000 approximately. And experts believe that we are around the 10,000 year mark. And when it comes to the recent 2,000 years, there have been a lot of ups and downs, but the focus right now among the people of the world is the change in climate during the past 100 years. Yes, there has been a rise in temperature, but this rise began in the 17th century when the Little Ice Age, which engulfed most of northern hemisphere, gave away to much warmer temperatures across the globe. And that has been increasing since the 17th century. And human emissions from greenhouse gases and our use of fossil fuels have contributed to this warming, but it's not as significant and as dangerous as many people portray it to be. So yeah, the climate has been changing, and it is changing, although it is never changing in a monotonous way. Rather, there have been a lot of ups and downs, and hardly any climate scientist in our world can predict how it would be in 5 or 10 years. So that's the reality on climate change. I believe the data, and climate data is not a fossil. It's not stored in a museum. Rather, it's a live data. It changes every day. So what I don't believe is in propaganda and narrative that is put forward by various sections of the society. So a climate realist is a person who acknowledges the changes in climate, including the current one. So how did I become one? I would say it relates to my postgraduate studies. I did it in the University of East Anglia, which is it has a center known as the Climate Research Unit. So this is where the had crude temperature data sets come from. And for those who are not aware, these temperature data is in turn used by scientists all over the world to determine how the temperature is progressing, etc., etc. So after my graduation, I realized that that there was a lot of controversy surrounding climate data. and whether they have been tampered with. So this arose my curiosity, and I began studying in depth. And I understood that among the available scientific literature, thousands and thousands of them, we find a diversity of opinion when it comes to how the climate has changed across thousands of years. And they are also open about how it could change in the coming decades and centuries. So that is when I try to distance myself with both the extremes. There are climate denialists who say that climate has not changed or there has been zero human contribution, and you have on the other spectrum, other end of the spectrum, you have the climate alarmists who say that we have 5 years, we have 2 years, we have 20 years to save the planet. So I distanced from myself from both the camps, and I became a climate realist. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There was a recent climate change conference in Glasgow, huge summit when they focus on global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. How do you think, how realistic is this plan to reduce CO2 emissions? Would it be effective to address climate change? You mean the actual CO2, would it change anything? And what kind of impact will it have on the economy? Like, I mean, the world, not only the Western world.
Yeah. I hope to answer all of those questions. Let me start off with CO2 reduction and the change in temperature. I'm just giving you a short-term example. It might not necessarily be true in a long term. For instance, if you look at 2016, the year 2016, it is the warmest year that we have on record. And that was because of the El Nino effect, which spiked temperatures across the globe. Now, after that, in 2017 and 2018, the CO2 level, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration levels, kept increasing, but the temperatures did not increase. So now, are we to say that CO2 has no impact on temperature? Absolutely not. We cannot claim that. But what we can say is what's happening in the nature seems to be slightly different from what we are told. The rise in CO2 in 2017 and 18 did not cause a corresponding increase in a warmest 2017 and 18. Rather, they were much colder than 2016. So that is where I would leave the CO2 question at. We are not sure. Whatever we are saying are just claims. We cannot be sure whether us reducing CO2 will have a definite impact on global average temperature, which is a subject in itself, because global average temperature is not easy to calculate, and there have been a lot of controversies regarding the data regarding that. So this is the reality that we live in. There's a vast gap between what is happening in Glasgow, what is being promised, and the reality of energy needs in many developing countries that are predominantly fossil. So the promises and the pledges that were made at Glasgow are just on paper as of now. It's hard to expect any quick follow through or fulfillment of those promises. Yeah. So can you remind me your other question? Oh, yeah, the impact on the economy. Yeah. So the United Nations released a report called 1.5 degrees Celsius, and I believe it was last year or the year before that. And in the report, United Nations is clear that if the world does not take serious action on reducing emissions, by the year 2100, the world will face, the global economy would face an impact of less than 5%. So what they mean to say is, even if we continue business as usual, by the year 2100, we would be paying a price of 3 to 4% of the global GDP. And if the impact on GDP is just below 5% in the year 2100. So this, the United Nations says this based on model projections and by calculating how much impact it would have on the global economy.
You just spoke about the previous IPCC report. Have you read the recent one, the latest one that came out? What's your opinion on it? What do you think?
I'm aware of some of the important claims made in those report, and usually they tend to be much more mellow and milder than what the media portrays it to be. So often what people hear is the journalist's interpretation of the IPCC report. The IPCC report says nothing different from what it has been saying for the past 10 years. And I worked with scientists who've been IPCC authors. The report essentially is a political document because IPCC is instituted by the United Nations. This is not to discredit the IPCC, rather I would call it a work in progress. Scientists are it. But I'll just give you an example. The IPCC report uses CMIP6 group of models. For those who are not aware, climate scientists project the future based on computer climate models. Now, there are a lot of models from across the globe. Until last year or so, the IPCC was using CMIP5, and now they are using CMIP6, which is a collection of hundreds of models, some of the best models from best scientists. But the problem is these models exaggerate the warming on Earth. Now, how do we know this? A couple of scientists use these models to understand whether they were able to predict the temperature in the last 10 years. And they found out that based on real life data and the model projections, that these models were very sensitive to CO2 emissions. In other words, they were calibrated in a way where they would spike the temperature even if there is a slight increase in CO2 emissions. And that is one of the reasons why they were unable to project or correspond to the real world temperatures. So the IPCC report is based entirely on these models. And based on these models, they project the increase in extreme weather events, the impact on economy, and so on. So it is still a work in progress, as I said, and these are early days for the IPCC. That is my opinion on their report. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Let's talk a little bit about the green energy. So everybody is talking about, getting rid of fossil fuels and how do we shift to solar, wind, and such. What are these green energy sources? And can you tell me success and failure stories on how does it help, how doesn't help? And especially in spite of last year's Texas freezing crisis and today energy crisis, what do you think about it?
Yeah, well, I would like to address this based on actual events rather than theoretical, data and opinions and theories that has been put forward regarding this. Because when it comes to the use of energy technologies, what matters is that how do they perform in real life? Because we are talking about people, like we would not have this conversation if there was no electricity. So I have a couple of perspectives, like examples, please bear with me. So one of my earliest experience with green technology was with solar. So solar and wind are the two biggest green energy or renewable sources that are being promoted across the globe. So in my home in rural India, we had solar panel to provide us hot water to take bath. So yes, it was extremely useful, and we've saved on a lot of wood because we would use wood to heat our water. So yeah, that was my earliest experience. But then after graduating in environmental studies and after applying myself to in-depth research on how much these technologies are useful to humanity, I found out that they are rather a pain for whichever country and energy grid that has adopted these renewables into their system. So, as you noted, Texas Freeze is a famous event that happened recently, where the state of Texas in US began to depend on renewables more and more, which means when there is an energy demand or there's a grid failure, it becomes all the more difficult because these sources, wind and solar, they are not available on demand. And they are not reliable. For those who do not know, wind energy across the globe does not work all throughout the year. There are certain seasons when it's efficient in its output. There are other seasons when it's not. And last month, in September, October, the United Kingdom, the UK faced a lot of challenges because their offshore windmills stopped working and they had to instantaneously turn on their coal plants. So this is what we deal with when it comes to wind and solar. And with solar, if you take a country like India, where there's a lot of monsoon rainfall during the summer months, and if all you have is cloud, it's quite difficult for you to get solar. Besides, we also have the example of California and Germany, which boast that they are the world leaders in renewables. But the problem is, data has shown that due to their excessive dependency on wind and solar, and the cost of maintaining these systems in the energy grid, the price of electricity has gone up and it has been passed on to the consumers. So Germany has the highest electricity price in Europe, and California too is infamous for its high energy prices. So this is something that a certain section of people in the developed world can bear with, but it's not the same case elsewhere. Even in countries like UK, people freeze to death because they cannot afford higher energy bills. And it's the same case in some of the hottest states in the US, where people cannot afford air conditioning in states like Arizona. And so if you take Africa, places like India, it's even worse. There are 300 million below the poverty line, and that's in India alone. And in Africa, I think people are already aware. And so renewables, as good as they seem to be, there are quite a lot of challenges. And as stated by one of the Indian delegate at the recent Glasgow meeting, that even if you cover the entire landscape with wind and solar, humanity does not have the technology right now to use all of those harnessed energy into the grid. The technology may come in the future, but at this point, we do not have something that can make energy from these resources cheaper. When you have wind and solar, it's a stopgap arrangement. Wind and solar can fail anytime. So you need to have a backup of coal-powered grid or nuclear power or hydropower wherever it's available. So these sources are always required. Now, not only that, you need equipments that can connect the grid to these renewable systems. So you have the machinery cost and the cost of having the backup on demand, which is quite difficult to do. For instance, just take coal. How much inventory would you need to have? And when do you need to turn on your coal power plant? Likewise with nuclear. And these are not very easy as it seemed to be, quite difficult. So all this increase the cost, and there are subsidies as well. And subsidies do not come from the sky. It is basically taken from the taxpayers' money. So all these add on to the cost, overall cost of producing, or I would say delivering the electricity to the consumer. So the consumer bears the cost, and the consumer also gives his taxes as subsidy to wind and solar. So it's not that I'm against wind and solar, but at this point, we don't have good examples of large towns or cities or industrial units being dependent on wind and solar. And yeah, so that's the reality.
Thank you very much. And the next question is, why do you think alternative green energy sources are getting promoted and endorsed as the best solution to address climate change? Are there any financial interest involved?
I wouldn't delve too much into that, but some of the climate alarmists, when I mean climate alarmists, those who say that we are doomed very soon because of climate change, seem to have benefited from their personal ventures in renewable industry. And one of the famous person would be Al Gore, the former US vice president. So he came up with the movie, The Inconvenient Truth, the documentary in 2007. Though he raised awareness about climate change, what people missed is that he has a huge empire of renewable energy venture. And this is not to say that people should not benefit from wind and solar. It's just to say that there is a lot of conflict of interest, promoting a danger and benefiting from the technology that you promote, that you sell to be a savior of humanity. So that is one example. And there are numerous examples, like even the very subsidy that's given to wind and solar across the globe comes from people. And if you would take a step back and just philosophically look at the subsidy issue, you would need to ask, why do you need subsidy for a technology that's very popular and that can save the world? It would be in demand. People would buy it. It would sell like any other energy technology. But why would you need subsidy to push it? And who are the benefactors? And so it is a complex issue. You have utility companies as well, and more recently you have all kinds of players like automobile makers, utility companies, and even some fossil fuel companies trying to incorporate wind and solar and other green energy into their business structure to benefit from the subsidies that are provided. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And in your articles, you mentioned the term energy poverty. Could you please explain what this term means, and are there relationships with the current policy on greenhouse emission reduction?
Yeah. So energy poverty is a simple term. It's essentially a person who's in poverty but of energy. Either he doesn't have the energy or he cannot afford to pay for the energy. So by energy, we talk about electricity, energy for cooking, for transport, and for other daily activities. So there's a common misconception that energy poverty is only in developing parts of the world. But even in the developed world, there are a lot of people who earn less and who are energy poor. I just mentioned about a couple of examples. The old age homes in UK suffer a lot when it comes to heating bills, and there have been news about households getting sick, extremely sick, because they cannot afford heating. So these are people in energy poverty. When you take Africa, much of Africa is without connectivity to the electricity grid. And when you take India, like you have millions of people who do not have clean cooking fuel, which is gas. They still depend on cow dung, and the waste from cow, and wood to prepare their food. So that is another form of energy poverty. And in China recently, more than 17 provinces faced unprecedented power cuts recently. And we even had images of the traffic signals not functioning and cars jamming against each other. So even in China, despite the image that is being portrayed as it being a superpower, there are still a lot of problems when it comes to energy poverty. So energy poverty is a real problem. It's a global problem, and it is worsened by the current policies that are being pushed from climate conferences such as Glasgow. Because from my knowledge, from what I've noticed ever since the beginning of the Paris Agreement in 2016, there has been very little concern about energy poverty in developing countries. And this is a real problem. And if you go to any big developing country and ask their leaders, one of their top 5 priorities would be securing energy resources for their people. And the United Nations, when it comes to this issue, has been working hard. But somehow, when it comes to the issue of climate change and these international agreements, they seem to miss this point altogether. So what they recommend for countries to move away from fossil fuels might not be very practical when it comes to the reality of energy needs in these countries, because what you want is reliable, efficient, and abundant resource, and that cannot be had in wind and solar, because the wind stops and sun sets, and the technology involves a lot of cost. And when you think about people who live at just less than $1 per day, and you cannot expect them to afford cooking gas or electricity. So to make these people access energy, it involves a large amount of planning and years of work. So thankfully, the governments across the globe have been working on this, but the current set of policies that are being promoted are threatening to reverse decades of fight against energy poverty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next question I have is about alternative energy sources. What makes an alternative energy source environmentally friendly? Because that seems to be the main issue thereafter, right?
Yeah, I mean, the mainstream philosophy on alternative energy sources, such as wind and solar, is that they reduce carbon emissions when compared to fossil fuels, and that's one of the reasons they are being touted as environmentally friendly. But what the mainstream misses out is a lot of other stuff. What happens when they are manufactured, and what happens when they are in operation, and what happens when they reach the end of life. So I would like to address all this because I was a field ecologist, and I worked with protected bird species in the grasslands of Portugal. I got an opportunity to work with a fine NGO there, which takes care of protected species. So as an ecologist and as a nature lover, I would say that the notion that these technologies are clean is very false. For example, I've written an article called Blood on the Blades. So it talks about the wind turbines and how they have been impacting global avian life, that is bird life, especially raptors. Raptors are birds like eagle, buzzards, hawks, kestrels, and these are all raptors, and even bald eagle. So raptors are killed in large numbers. Thousands of raptors are killed by wind turbines, and wind turbines are notorious for that. So as someone who loves nature, and as someone who's talked to people who work in bird conservation, the fact that they're calling wind as clean and environmentally friendly is a joke. But people push back against that, telling me that cats kill more birds than wind turbines. That is a false argument. Like, that doesn't mean you have to increase their death by installing more blades. And I don't know about the governments in Europe, but the US government has a killing quota for all the wind turbines. So each wind turbine has a killing quota. They can kill these many raptors and these many birds, and beyond that they have to take measures to reduce bird deaths. In fact, my master's degree dissertation or project was on identifying markers that will enable birds to avoid man-made structures like power lines. So this is a major issue, and much research has been done, are happening, in fact, to help birds avoid these wind turbines. But so far, no efficient solution has been found. And besides that, if the viewers are not aware, the wind turbine requires a lot of fossil fuel. So from its blades to its turbine, and it also requires a lot of rare earth materials, and rare earth minerals cause a lot of pollution during their production stage. And there are lakes in China which are toxic lakes because of the waste from the production of rare earth minerals, which is in turn used in wind and solar. So the notion that these come from a non-fossil fuel source or from clean source is false. And during operation, as I have illustrated, that they kill a lot of birds. And when it comes to end of life, we've seen reports after reports of huge wind turbines, windmills buried in the ground because it cannot be disposed. So there are a lot of concerns and environmental concerns regarding this. So I would not call them environmental friendly. Now, when it comes to carbon emissions, the question to ask is how much of the carbon emissions do they offset? Because we have other natural factors that can contribute to increase in global CO2 concentration levels. And sometimes what we do with these technologies and how we reduce our emissions might not be as significant as it's portrayed to be. So that is a question that we do not know the answer for, because we have to wait and see how much of a reduction they are able to produce. I'm quite clear that the making of a wind turbine is entirely dependent on coal. So that's the reality that people forget.
Thank you very much. And what about payback on alternative energy sources, and alternative energy sources profitable now?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the question of whether what it will do to the grid. When we talk about wind and solar, it might profit the utility company and the power generators, but not necessarily the government or the consumer. So that remains a problem in the advanced states such as California and Germany. This would be a huge issue if it were to happen in developing parts of the world, where energy prices could decide everything. But since it's happening in a milder form in the developed nations, people are not noticing it. But they would soon, when this starts to hit lower income households, even in those countries. So I would categorically disagree with the fact that they are becoming cost effective, because when you add them to the grid, and when you use them and when you depend on them, it increases the risk and the cost of operation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The majority of people today gets the message from the media that alternative green energy and is safe and the way to go. And most of the people don't think hard about it. They just accept it. What can we do to change that, and what should be done to make public aware of it, and to make their own choice rather than believing the media?
Yeah, well, it's a hard thing to do for a common person. because the media houses today are divided, and you have political sections on the right and the left and then the middle. So some media outlets favor the right, some favor the left, and some the middle. And when the state of media is in such a nature, there's a tendency for people to align themselves with certain media houses. And for instance, just to give you an example with the climate perspective, one media could fully push technologies like wind and solar, but another media house can say that we are not in any danger. Uh, we don't have to care about this, and this is like a evil scheme to destroy the local fossil fuel industry. This could be the narrative in another. So people, to be honest, people are confused as to what source they go to, and there is very little we can do about it. I think the Creative Society is doing one such role in helping people understand these issues, and for them to listen to diverse voices, f- uh, to arrive at more clarity regarding issues that do not um, that do not have the same kind of uh, projection that you guys give. For instance, all you get on the media is uh, repetitive, monotonous uh, one-liners about climate and temperature. This month is the hottest ever in recorded history, and Greta Thunberg says that the current generation is killing the planet, and the future generations will suffer. So these are the kind of news you keep on hearing. So one such way is to get the citizens to listen to a diverse view and opinion, and you're doing that. The other way would be to make institutions of research, such as academic institutions, autonomous, and to be less dependent on government funding. In that way, academicians and scientists are free to research on the matter and provide their findings and outputs to people in a more legitimate way, rather than sit back on government funded money and make reports for the government, which is then publicized by the mainstream media. So that is one of my concerns as being from academic background. I think it plays an important role, like uh, what decides the pathway of a research unit, of a university, of the academicians. So that is one way we can help the scientific fraternity to get back on their autonomous path and not be worried about what politicians think about them. So these are a couple of ways, but I think there has even to know what has to be done. We need a lot of research, because the mainstream media simply has swallowed up people's time and mind. It's quite hard to overcome that. And another interesting thing that I would like to share is about the issue of fact checkers on social media and in mainstream media. It would really help people if people are told who these fact checkers are, and what are their backgrounds and where do they come from. Because what we have right now is each media vouching for its own position, and having this ghost fact checkers whose names are not known, who tend to fact check. So it would help the people if things are more transparent. Yes, we need fact checking, but we need people to know who are doing it and what are their ideologies. So this is another important aspect as we are increasingly moving into a digital world, and especially with the pandemic, you can see we've become very digitized, and we require more transparency. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I couldn't answer to you in a clear sense, because this is such a difficult thing to do, to get people look beyond the mainstream media thing, that an issue that many people are struggling with on how to achieve this. So that's why I had to give a couple of my suggestions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Basically, to summarize all of the above you just said is we need free, open, unprejudiced information source, which will be stating the truth, right? Basically.
Yeah, those are apt words. Thank you. You're very good with words. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Question: we pretty much finished with the main ones, but I would like to add a few. There is a notion of using electrical cars these days, and what kind of impact it's going to have on our world? Is it going to be more clean? What is going to do to the economy and to the grid?
To be honest, I'm a big fan of the Tesla empire, but not because of the EV vehicle, but because of the way in which they were able to rise so fast. But having said that, when it comes to impact, I would start from my home. So we are increasingly seeing cities in Europe and elsewhere that are banning EV vehicles to be parked under the basement in their buildings and apartments, and that's because they're catching fire. Even when they are stationary. And so if I think about my personal safety, that would be one of my issues, because I live in a country where hardly there is any regulation on safety, especially. And for instance, last month we had a woman burn with fire in an apartment because the apartment did not have proper safety features. So it's a nightmare for a country like India, where vehicles can catch fire anywhere. Whereas in countries like Europe and US, the proper regulations could make sure that those are parked in appropriate places. So that is the first point I would start with. But when it comes to other issues, EV batteries are not clean. Again, these batteries emit a lot of emissions, sometimes as much as what a petrol or a diesel car would emit in 1 or 2 years. That's how much emissions happen just during the battery manufacturing stage of high-end Tesla, let's say. So the notion that they are clean and they are emission-free is wrong. And when I look at it, would I have a car more than 4 years, especially in the 21st century? Certainly not. So that means my emissions from my EV vehicle would not be insignificant. They would be significant. Like I cannot claim that I somehow saved the environment. And on the flip side, our car technology, combustion engine technologies are getting better and better, reducing pollution to a very high level. And that's why you can see in European countries, households with 2-3 cars, yet the air quality index remaining extremely good in those cities. So that is the counter argument to the EV vehicle push. So that those are my opinion on EV vehicles. Well, it's good when people can afford it and if it's safe, but to push it upon people and to have it expensive as well is wrong. India is on the verge of making EV vehicles compulsory in certain sectors, two-wheelers, and that is quite bad for the people here, because the vehicle costs 3 times as much as the lower end petrol vehicle. So that is my opinion on EV vehicle. It's good and well if we are able to afford it and it doesn't cause a hole in people's pockets. That's good, but I don't think we are at a stage where we can push.
Okay, one more question about, they're still using electricity which is produced which way?
Yeah, that is a whole different argument. So when people talk about EV vehicles, let's talk about EV vehicles. But then when you talk about carbon emissions and they are clean, well, where does the electricity come from? So the most recent event is the Glasgow Climate Conference, and there was a hotel which used EV vehicles to transport the guests to the conference and back to the hotel. And they used diesel generators to power these EV cars at a climate conference event. And we've even had similar cases in US and elsewhere, where people use diesel generators to power their EV vehicles, because charging charging stations for EV is not yet widely distributed. That's one of the reasons. And when you come to country like India, like 70% of our electricity comes from coal, and hydroelectricity makes up another 15%, and only 7 to 9% comes from solar and wind. So essentially, it is more likely that you would consume coal electricity to run your EV vehicle. And in France, it's nuclear. And so that is a fair question. It is a question with completely closes off the argument on EVs being clean if you are going to run it on energy sources that you claim to be dirty and evil. So that is a major headache. Yeah.
How important is it for all people of the planet to unite now and change the format of our society from the consumeristic format to the creative one, and to where the value of each human life is in the first place, where we can withstand climate change by uniting all together?
Yeah, I mean, from my personal point of view, I believe we are living in a world which doesn't have borders. So even within our countries, no matter which country you are from, it's likely that your parents or your grandparents or the generation before that migrated from a village to a city or the rivers, whatever it be. But it's increasingly becoming clear that we are having these borders between countries, and it's just a social construct. Be it goods, be it energy, be it ideas, be it cultural practices, everything is now transported across the globe. And the digital technology has enabled us to share it much more faster. So we live we are already in a collective society in some way. To make it better and for us to be more collective, I think we need nations to be sovereign. We should respect their autonomy to function and to govern. But at the same time, there needs to be increased relationships to the tune of, for instance, UK, after they left the European Union, began having a lot of trade relationships and new alliances with countries. So likewise, we should see increased trade partnerships, economic partnerships across the globe. And that's one way we can formally and more effectively unite people, in which people in some parts of the world can benefit from people in other parts of the world. From what I see, there's a huge divide in the world. People, especially from South America and Africa, are way behind the rest of the continents. Even though Asia has a lot of poverty, I think the state of Africa is really bad, where people do not have electricity to even have a surgery in a hospital. So that's the state we are talking about. So uniting is a great idea, but it has to be done on a careful note, where a local administration still exist.
In creative society, we're actually looking forward, and we are doing everything possible, hoping we will achieve the goal that there are going to be no poverty in the world. There are going to be even income distribution. There will going to be no war. So basically, there is no need to sustain multi-trillion-dollar, military-industrial complex and so on. Do you think that we could be using our scientific potential, our economical potential, our human potential in a much better way, so we actually address those issues which are actually pressing, rather than create new weaponry and masterful improve the way we kill each other?
That's a nice question. Yeah, I mean, I always tend to start from the personal. I think it begins with each individual. I know you're looking for a more generic or a broad answer, but I would say it starts from the person. I think if we decide to focus our energy into creativity and productivity rather than enmity and destruction. And that's the starting point. And when that happens, I think eventually every subset of social structure will have individuals who are like-minded, who want to invent and to put in the effort to make the entire unit. I think for me, I would also like people to address on the importance of the personal starting point, and it can flow into your families and your neighborhood and your city, and it's quite important. And especially we know that brilliant minds and people come from very ordinary background as well, and when these ideals are established among the society, it will have a knock-on effect, a domino effect, leading all the way up to the top. And we see it again and again in global leaders, some of the political leaders who function really good and who are able to focus on the right things. Yeah.
Well, you said a wonderful thing that everything starts with an individual. What do people have to do to improve themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. My answer might be surprising to you, but I've been a seeker of understanding truth right from my childhood. So I took my interest in philosophy and world religions and stuff like that, and that's a good starting point to understand the differences, the similarities, and what they try to say. So that is a good starting point. And it's also important to understand the various ideologies on how the society functions, the benefits of various government types. There is theocracy, there's democracy, and there is communism. So yeah, I think these are some of the things that people need to spend time on, and it's quite important. You understand the world better, and you understand what's good and what's not. But if you're gonna just buy a ready to consume idea on the media, it will lead nowhere. And I think the curriculums in schools especially must be broadened for space and time for students to spend time on these issues. Yeah. So this is a personal answer, like something that I would like more and more individuals do. No age is too late. They can do it even in their 30s and 40s. Yeah. So that's my suggestion.
Amazing. I have to say that you are amongst friends as far as your philosophy goes, because we are also a big believers in human improvements and self-improvement. I think you would find interesting to look into 8 foundation of creative society, because they will correspond to your wishes and the way you think that government and society should be improved at, because they actually look into that the world should be a safer place, world should be a friendlier place, better place, should be oriented towards human caring for each other rather than killing and so on. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
My message to the world is that we should stop getting into a panic on climate. Rather, we should be wise and sensible with how we approach the environmental problems that we are facing. And that involves a lot of data. And so one of my requests to the people is to get into the details of various environmental issues that they read about on the newspaper and see on their TV, and get a better sense of where the world is headed. And I believe that with available technology and various innovations, we will be able to handle the future and with much efficiency.
Thank you very much.
Today, everyone is concerned about climate change. Large climate conferences are being held where leaders of countries Scientists and representatives of corporations are looking for solutions together. It seems that the problem is about to be permanently solved. We will all tighten our belts and switch to renewable sources. We are assured that if the chimneys of thermal power plants stop smoking, all nuclear power plants are closed, and they build solar, wind, and hydroelectric power plants everywhere on the planet, then by 2050, we will have carbon-free energy production. This will supposedly save the world, preserve the environment, and everyone will be happy. Therefore, it is suggested that all the best minds and resources of humanity devote themselves to the development of green technologies. But what are we missing? Will it really save us? Aren't we losing the most valuable things in all of this, time and opportunities? A more in-depth study of the subject reveals obvious facts that point to a major planetary fraud. So let us figure it out together, one step at a time. Today, renewable sources make up about 28% of total energy. Yet in order to produce them, we still use non-renewable natural resources. All this continues to contribute to the depletion and pollution of the planet. Solar panels, for example, contain such heavy metals as lead, cadmium, and mercury. During operation, they leach into the ground and evaporate into the atmosphere. Waste from solar panels is 300 times more toxic than nuclear waste and requires special disposal. But since it costs more than production, they decided not to bother with it and send the used panels to landfills in poor countries. So far, not a single country in the world today has regulations for their disposal. According to scientists' studies, by 2030, there will be up to 8 million tons of green waste in the world, and by 2050, these volumes will increase to 80 million tons. Let us imagine how these numbers would increase if we completely switch to these sources. Is this calculated in the reports? And is this topic explored that deeply at the conferences? As you can see, this only makes the environmental situation worse, and this is just the tip of an iceberg that we have to look into deeper. So what's wrong with wind farms? Let's start with our wallets, out of which you and I will have to pay for these ambitious solutions. To build a wind farm requires an enormous investment of money and resources. At that, the average lifespan of a wind turbine is 20 years, and during this time, it manages to recoup only 78% of the money spent upon its construction and installation. We are not even talking about maintenance, which implies building special-purpose vessels, expensive utility high-rises, and constant replacement of blades. Just one wind turbine requires more than 500 tons of lubricants, which is comparable to 9 tank cars of railway trains, which, by the way, are also produced from non-renewable resources of the planet. Just think about it. The size of the blades can be as big as the length of a soccer field. And do you know what they are made of? That's right, of that very plastic that we continue to struggle with so unsuccessfully around the world. Because of their gigantic size and hazardous chemical composition, they can't be recycled. So the classic solution is that the blades are taken to landfills and covered with soil. After all that, do you still think wind power is environmentally friendly? Now let us take a look at the downside of hydropower. 65% of the world's major rivers are blocked by hydroelectric dams. At that, dam failures and breaches put lives at risk, and the planet's ecology suffers. Hydroelectric power plants directly affect the bowels of the Earth. Tons of water from reservoirs press against tectonic plates, causing man-made earthquakes. We keep being persuaded that alternative sources will improve the environment and solve the issue of climate change. Why? Where does such pushy advertising of green energy and show of concern for us come from? After all, it is not profitable for the states that are forced under pressure to subsidize these projects and buy this energy at 5 times the price of traditional energy. Germany is a prime example. By shutting down most nuclear power plants in favor of green energy, it has hit a dead end. On best productivity days, it generates only 17% of its electricity. So, today, it has to buy energy with huge amounts of taxpayer money from the same non-green nuclear power plants in neighboring countries. Tell me, isn't that absurd? There is also another important fact worth noting. Renewable energy depends on the sun and the wind. So it must either be used immediately or accumulated in batteries. Yet, electricity is a complicated and expensive commodity to store. Let us calculate how many batteries are needed to store electricity and use it during periods without wind or sun or during emergencies. Imagine, an average two-person family consumes about 235 kilowatts per month. Roughly 100 batteries of 2.4 kilowatts would be needed to cover one family's monthly electricity needs. Now let's recall that a battery is the conversion of electrical energy into chemical energy and back again. To create them, harmful chemicals are used that cannot be recycled. And in order to produce cobalt, child labor in underground mines in the Congo is used. All this is done to allow us to breathe supposedly clean air. To summarize, with such aggressive promotion of alternative energy sources, are we taking into account their low efficiency factor and impact on ecology? Do we fully understand the threat to humanity as a result of renunciation of hydrocarbons at a time of global climate change? Because of the manipulation of public opinion, states are forced to shut down industries that run on coal, oil, and gas. This leads to a crisis in the energy sector at a time when we desperately need it. It is becoming obvious that alternative energy sources are not only developed as a source of income for one and the same organizations and corporations, but most importantly, they are used as a tool to control the nation's energy industry. In the end, we are back to the same game of power and lust for profit instead of concern for people and saving their lives. But at the same time, many people see this as a hope and a way out of the climate situation. Considering all of the above, we should all answer the following questions together. Should we actively develop alternative energy if it has so many disadvantages? Is it beneficial for us as a humanity today? Or should we apply our efforts to a more effective solution? After all, today there are already technologies that are capable of using free energy. But in a consumerist format, this beautiful prospect becomes a problem. It would be impossible to sell this energy if it were available to everyone in unlimited quantities. So we come to a dead end, which would bring about collapse of the economic system, crisis, and wars. This is why we need the right step-by-step approach. First of all, to change the format, to build a creative society, a format that benefits absolutely everyone and will save the life of every person. Then we can easily implement this technology without any damage to our lives. But this is a decision we must all make together. So today, the future development of society is up to each individual, whether we will continue falling down into the abyss blown by windmills, or if we will unite and take the path of development.